And thank you all for taking the time to come join us for this conversation. The way that we've set this up is, as part of this tech and data track here at GovHR, a lot of the conversations yesterday were focused on data as the foundation for what we're thinking about. And as we head into the rest of the conference, you'll notice there's a lot of AI heavy specific conversations. We wanted to put this here as kind of a way to set a foundation, a shared language and understanding of some of the basics. So what we're going to be doing today is give you some introductions of who we are, what the work that we do here at the partnership around artificial intelligence, talk about what AI is more broadly. A lot of times nowadays when we say AI, we mean generative AI, but we're going to zoom out a little bit and look at AI as a whole, and then zoom back in and look at generative AI. We'll look at some specific use cases for government HR, and then we'll also talk about the responsible use of AI in context of our work.
If I may, and I apologize, if you have a thought or a question or an insight to share, please just raise your hand. Izzy's got a mic to bring over to you all so that our friends online can hear and participate as well. Okay? Good stuff. Okay.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Bola. Well, great. Well, we will dive right in. So, as Bola said, my name is Jake Bell. I'm a manager of technology and innovation here at the Partnership for Public Service, and I'm joined, as she mentioned, by my colleague Amanda.
Hello, I am Amanda Starling Gould. I'm Senior Manager of AI Strategy and Innovation at the Partnership. I help coordinate work across our AI Center for Government and help support staff internally on their use of generative AI. Jake will be our primary educator here today, but he generously asked me to join to share a bit about our work at the AI Center and to stick around to support the Q&A portion. As you may know or may not know, the partnership has been thinking about government's use of AI since 2018. You can see a fancy timeline on our AI Center website if you're keen to track our history. But I can say in 2024, we gathered this work under the umbrella of the Partnership for Public Service AI Center for Government in order to solidify our commitment to fostering AI leadership, talent, and literacy across federal, state, and local governments. Our goal is to ensure that public sector leaders are effective users and smart regulators of AI technology. And we do that through our various programming, and our programming hits upon four key, we'll call them buckets for lack of another term. First is that we are developing AI leaders, and we are equipping public sector leaders with the skills to evaluate AI claims, develop AI strategy, and deploy AI solutions in the service of their agency's mission. We do this in large part through our AI Government Leadership Program, which serves senior agency leaders across all levels of government. Please do consider this a plug for the program and an invitation to apply. Another area of work that we have is that we are focused on strengthening AI talent capacity in government by helping public sector attract, retain, and train new AI professionals. This summer, for example, we worked with the state of Maryland to create their first dedicated AI intern cohort. We're incredibly excited and proud. Next summer, we're working with universities and governments across the country to place students into AI internships in government. A third bucket of our work is that we are empowering AI literacy by providing public sector leaders with ongoing interdisciplinary and cross-sector events like this one, and opportunities to learn and discuss together how AI is and could be at work on the ground. Yesterday, we hosted a panel on AI for building civic resilience at the NCOC conference down the road. Today, we're here with you. And in the coming weeks, we're planning an AI talent roundtable and an AI use case showcase. We're really focused and feel it's important to continue the conversation and to provide these spaces where we can talk together about what is happening and what might happen and how we can shape what is going to happen. Our fourth category of work is that we are celebrating agencies at all levels of government who are using AI effectively. We're doing that by capturing stories of government agencies. If you want to tell your story, let us know. We'd love to tell it. But we're telling stories about government agencies using AI to benefit the public. You can catch these on our blog. Not only are we celebrating exemplary uses of AI there, but we're curating really through telling those stories, we're curating best practices you might apply or better practices, as I heard said earlier in one of the sessions, that we might apply in your agencies. And I'll pass back now to Jake to give us an overview of how the tools work and how we can use that knowledge of how they work to better work with them. Knowing how they work also helps us evaluate their outputs and helps us protect our employees, our colleagues, and ourselves as automated tools increasingly inform or co-make or make workplace-related decisions. Being exposed to these inner workings of the tools helps give us a shared language to speak with those who might be building the tools. I often think about the superpower of knowing a little bit about how the tool works, even if you're not building it, will allow you to have a better conversation with the person who is. And as I tell my own students, knowing how the tools works, a little bit about them, helps us see where we might apply our disciplinary expertise to shape the ways that we and our organizations create AI policy, determine AI use, and build AI tools. It goes without saying, but I'll say it anyway, that HR professionals, is my opinion, HR professionals are the experts we need at the table to best produce fit-for-service AI-powered HR solutions. Peeling back the curtain a bit with Jake today may help you be more effective at that table. So I will be quiet now and will be eager for your questions at the end.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Amanda, for your thoughtfulness and leadership in this space. Perfect. So diving right in, we'll start with like when we talk about artificial intelligence, what are we saying? The term was first coined in 1956 by John McCarthy, who was a computer scientist. And from the very beginning, the term artificial intelligence has caused imagination and wonder as well as confusion. Now, the artificial side of it is fairly easy for folks to kind of understand. It's more the intelligent side, right? If you ask a biophysicist or a neurologist or many different folks, what is intelligence? You will get many different answers. So I figured we'd start by looking at some government and tech sector definitions. No need to digest everything on this slide, but these are definitions of artificial intelligence that come from the federal level, from the states of Texas, Colorado, and Georgia, as well as from Google and Microsoft. And the themes that I want to pull out from this is you see the machine-based or computers and machines, so that harkens to the artificial side of things, so great. The other side, what you'll find here is predictions, recommendations, decisions, creation of content, reasoning, learning, acting, learning, problem solving. So there isn't a great shared definition that we all have, but in general, the way that people tend to think about this is things that have historically been associated with humans and what humans can uniquely do are what we're talking about here in the context of artificial intelligence. Now that's what it is, but what can it do? So this is a list that comes from the National Institute of Standards and Technology. They have an AI taxonomy of what are the types of things you could be using AI to do. Now, to be clear, some of this is generative AI. Others of these are more broader kind of AI, machine learning, deep learning. We'll talk about some of those terms in a minute. But here again, what I'm trying to convey is the breadth of what you can do. And as we talk about this technology, sometimes how difficult it is to have conversations when we're talking about the same technology that could be used to write a cute poem, but also is helping us to teach cars to drive themselves. Right, so it's a breadth of technologies that we're talking about, and the technology. When we say AI itself is not a monolith, and neither is the application of the use of AI. And so, it's helpful when engaging in these conversations to try to find that shared. Oh, okay, are we talking about generative AI? Are we talking about AI more broadly? Is something that I find to be pretty helpful. Just to ground us in what we're talking about, you may hear some of these terms thrown around, whether it's in media or whether it's in the press, whether it's in movies, television shows. Basically, you'll hear weak AI and strong AI, or you may hear narrow intelligence versus general intelligence versus super intelligence. The things where we talk about, technology, the AI getting so much that it could match a human or exceed a human's abilities as a whole, that's all kind of on the right-hand side. All of that is purely theoretical. There's no practical application or existing application of AI today that fits in that bucket. So what we're talking about, and that's what we're going to be focused on today, is the AI that we have. What does it look like? How do we use it? How does it work? Is considered to be weak and narrow, which is hard to imagine when you think about what it's capable of doing. But again, just to kind of ground us, we're not talking about like the future, it's going to destroy everything or save everything. We're talking about kind of the practical that it's doing here. This is another graphic that has a lot of pieces to it, so I don't necessarily to get you bogged down in it, but the thing that I want to highlight is that when we talk about generative AI, you'll see it associated there on the bottom right as Gen AI. That's one piece of a much broader ecosystem of what we're talking about when we mean artificial intelligence. On the right-hand side, most of this falls into the bucket of what we call machine learning. The thing about machine learning that was really amazing and new is that historically computing applications had to be told very specifically what to do, right? It was do this, then do this. If this happens, then do this. With machine learning, these are algorithms where you feed it data, right? You train it on a set of data, and then it's able to do a task or do something based off of that data without me having to tell it, okay, make it based off of this decision, do it based off of this. It's pulling it from the data that it was trained on. And so that's what made machine learning, has made machine learning so impactful, but also comes with limitations that we will discuss as well. Great, a brief history of AI. And again, point here is just to show this is not something new. Generative AI certainly feels very new and to us, but if you look at the history of AI, and it was mentioned by Shankar in the keynote this morning, right, it's been around for 70 plus years. The thing that I want to show here is these blue dots are what we call AI winters, right? So at the beginning of AI, there was a lot of excitement. There was like news reports saying, oh, back in the 50s, 60s, saying that, oh, psychologists are going to be put out of business by this technology in the next 5 years. Spoiler alert, that did not happen. And then the hype got so big that the funding dried up because it wasn't living up to what it was promising. And then it kind of went into obscurity for a while. And then it came back a little bit, same thing, hype outpaced what it was able to do, funding dried up, we went through another winter. And now we're on this much more steady and a higher, much more interested decline, right? Incline, right? You think of the history, this was primarily stuck in like academic circles, whereas now AI certainly is much more broadly understood and known, and people have actually heard of it. So again, nothing new. So from what we've discussed so far, I know it's a lot of boxes and words and numbers and things, but basically AI has many different uses, some more reliable than others. The tools that we use today are considered weak and narrow. There's a lot more to AI than just generative AI. And then while generative AI is new, the broader field of AI is not new. And these AI winters are brought on usually by too much hype, which leads to a lack of funding. So that's kind of the scene setting there. So then from there, let's talk about generative AI, right? So again, this is the thing that we usually mean when we say AI nowadays. So this is a definition that comes from the National Library of Medicine, saying generative artificial intelligence is a system of algorithms or computer processes that can create novel output in text, images, or other media based on user prompts. So right, we're all familiar with this. You put a prompt into a tool, it uses its algorithms, and it outputs text or video or sound or whatever based on the kind of tool that you're interacting with. Generative AI really has the potential to enhance government's ability to deliver solutions and services to the public. And I think this is, we've talked a lot about this. I know, again, Shankar this morning brought this up a lot of the potential of AI to really transform government operations. And they can do amazing things and seem magical, but the main takeaway that I want to leave with you when it comes to generative AI is that under the hood, they're primarily using statistical predictions about what comes next based on patterns found in the training data. So it's not magic, it's math, right? We're talking about basic probabilities and statistics that in a very impressive way, and there's a lot of work that goes into this, but that's really what is at its core. I do want to touch on the role of data. As I mentioned before, I know many of the sessions yesterday were focused on data as its foundation. And there's a very specific reason why the tech and data track was sequenced this way, because data is the lifeblood of artificial intelligence, and especially for machine learning applications, as we talked about, because data is how they are trained. It's how they quote unquote learn and are able to accomplish what they can. Now, data used to train a model must be accurate, complete, consistent, and relevant. There's this term that I'm sure you all have heard of garbage in, garbage out, right? So if you're feeding in bad data, the wrong data, incomplete data, the resulting system that you will get from that will just amplify all of those inaccuracies or missing pieces. So data, very critical. So let's look at some uses of Gen AI in government HR that you may have heard of or you may see. So one is plain language job descriptions. So whether it's drafting a job description from scratch, whether it's taking a very jargony, heavy job description, you can plug it into a tool and say, hey, write this for someone who doesn't have a government background or who doesn't have knowledge of all of these acronyms or what have you, and it can make it a much more plain language job description. Tailored candidate outreach. So you could, as you're reaching out to different candidates that you're trying to recruit for roles, you could say, hey, rewrite this outreach pitch for someone who has a deep government background, who doesn't have a government background, who comes from this sector, who has this kind of experience, is this far in their career. And it could very narrowly tailor each message for those different audiences as you're doing that outreach. Personalized onboarding guides, similar concept here, right? As you have people coming into your organization and you're getting them up to speed, depends on what kind of experience they're bringing in them, what kind of training and onboarding do they need. And generative AI tools, you could put it into a generative AI tool, explain the profile of the person you're trying to onboard, and it can adapt the document accordingly. Chat-based support is one that we hear a lot about, right? So you may have a lot of different HR policies, whether that's on leave or benefits or anything like that. And instead of having them come to you or your teams to constantly ask questions, could you layer a chat-based support on top of that where they could interact 24 hours a day, whenever they want, and it can answer their questions or point them to the right resources where they can get those answers. Another one that I've heard that I find to be really interesting is this idea of simulated focus groups. So if you're getting ready to roll out a policy or a change of some kind, and you want to anticipate what are the kinds of questions that people would have, or how would people react to this, right? Put in there, here's a profile of what I do in the organization that I work in. Here's the type of people I'm rolling this out to. What are the kinds of questions I could anticipate, or what's the kind of pushback that I might get from this? And then you could take that into consideration, right? Adapt your materials accordingly, adapt your approach as you're getting ready to roll out a change management process. Now, what's important with all of this is that you should never just take something out of a generative AI tool and just use it without actually looking at it. And so we call this, but this is an element of what we call the human in the loop approach. So this is to ensure accuracy, reduce potential harms. It's important that a human is involved from the very beginning of training a model, making sure that the data is good, all the way to the output of the model and how it is used. This is something Amanda talks about frequently that I really appreciate, is that folks tend to be nervous to get started with these tools because it feels very technical, it feels very hard to understand. And she rightfully highlights the fact that the main skill that you need to be able to use generative AI is the ability to review an output and determine if it's the thing you, right? We've been doing this in other contexts. Maybe a colleague hands us a document and we verify, okay, yes, this is correct, or yes, this is what I would want. We should treat this the same way. You would take something out of the tool, determine, is this accurate? Is this the tone that I want? Is this, whatever criteria you want to use before using it. But like I said, that's just one piece throughout the process of developing, using, deploying, whatever it is, an AI tool. We need to make sure humans are centered at every part of that journey. Want to touch briefly on prompt engineering. I don't know if this is a term you may or may not have heard of. This is just the idea of how do we take the prompts that we're putting into these chatbots and frame them in a way that we get the best outputs out of them. So like I said, there's a definition here. There's a great worksheet that comes from Innovate US, which is a nonprofit organization that works to train federal, state, and local leaders and workers on tech things, especially around AI. They have a prompt engineering worksheet that gives them best practices that I just want to touch on quickly. So as you're putting a prompt into a system, there's 5 kind of main things that they emphasize and that you'll find in lots of different prompt engineering guides. The first is the instruction, or just the basic task. Like, what is it that you want it to do, right? Write an email, draft a document, help me brainstorm. Like, what is the thing that you want it to do? Second is the role, right? So if you give it a role, it kind of helps it to know how to frame it. So, okay, you are an HR professional. You are a member of this team, and describe what that's like. You are a helpful assistant, whatever you want, kind of persona you want it to take on, it's helpful to give it that explicitly. Third is the format, right? I want a short tweet or that I could put on social media, or I want a policy document. I want a table. I want a list. So like whatever, the more specific you can be about what format you want it to come back in, the more helpful it will be. Context, right? What is any background or detail needed for the task? So, any background information about what it's going to be used for, or the audience that's going to be consuming it, any of that, always helpful. And it's always helpful if you can provide any sort of examples, right? So if you have, oh, I've done this before, and this is a really good example of what this should look like. Here's a great job description, right? So mirror this, but for this job over here instead, for example. And then there's a few other best practices they highlight about asking the tool to go step by step. So rather than giving it an enormous task and just say, do this, if you can break it down into pieces and ask it to break down its process into steps, you can then verify as it goes along the way how it's doing. Or then you as the user, rather, you can break your task into stages and then just prompt it step by step in those stages as you go. And then finally, this is one of my favorite things, is just asking it what it wants, right? Saying like, here's what I'm trying to do. What do you need from me? What should I be giving you in order for you to do this? And it'll tell you, it'll say, oh, give me some context here. Answer these 3 questions to make it more useful. So takeaways from this section, I would say, right, generative AI can seem like magic, but at its core, it's just pattern matching and probabilities. Good data is critical for generative AI to produce helpful and accurate results. It's important to always follow a human in the loop approach, and using simple prompt engineering techniques can greatly improve the quality of the outputs that we get. The last section that I want to touch on is around responsible use of AI. So I think Amanda was highlighting this earlier. All government functions have a role to play in building and maintaining trust, but human capital teams, I think, have a critical need, right, when it comes to ensuring fairness, protecting privacy, all those kinds of things. So some of the considerations that I would highlight, one is around fairness, right, making sure that the tools that you are using is treating everyone the same. As we talked about, a lot of it depends on the data that a system is being trained on. So if you're training a system that's going to look at and review resumes, which is a whole thing we should talk about there. If the data that it's being used on, that it's being trained on, is just, oh, here's all the resumes we've received in the past, and here's all the people we've hired based off of those resumes. Train, go ahead. It's going to pick up whatever unfairness existed in that process and just amplify it moving forward, right? So just making sure that the way that the tools are being used, the way that the tools have been trained, is being done in a way that ensures fairness. And again, the primary way we do that is by verifying the output, asking critical questions about it, things like that. Privacy, confidentiality, and data security. So anything you put into a tool could potentially be used to train that model and end up as part of it. So certainly if you're using the free version of ChatGPT, Gemini, and Claude, any of these tools, if you're using the free version, basically everything you put into there is being used to train that model, which is why they say never ever put anything confidential or anything in there. Now you could be using the paid version, which the company will then promise you that they're not using any of that to train their models. You get to decide if that's a risk profile you would like to take on. And then the other option is maybe you have a custom built tool within your agency that's on premise, that's closed, that's protected, all of that. And even in those cases, I would say just be aware of who has access to that tool, because even if it's staying locally, someone else could potentially interact with that system and get that data back out of it potentially. So things to keep in mind. Accuracy is always one. You hear the term hallucinations a lot of, like, sometimes, right? Again, it's not thinking critically. Like, the system is not thinking, the system is not reasoning, the system is just outputting what it thinks the next thing should be based on what it was trained on. And so sometimes it will very confidently tell you something that's wrong. But so just ensuring accuracy in the use. Certainly transparency and explainability. A lot of these systems can be almost like black boxes, especially when it comes to deep learning, which is that subset we saw within machine learning, where very explicitly we know what's being input into the system. We know what's coming out as output, but all the layers in between are literally called hidden layers, because we don't really know what's happening between those 2 points. And systems are getting better at this, but in general, this idea of like our ability to understand why a decision was made or how we explain how we got there can be very tricky. And so depending on the type of task you're doing, if it's critical to be able to go point by point through how you made it to that decision, be cautious of your use of the tools. This becomes another issue as well when it comes to redress, right? Especially, I think, in an HR function, if you're making decisions using the outputs of these tools and someone comes to you and says, that's wrong, can you explain how you got there? And do you know who to blame, right? Is it the person who developed the tool that's to blame? Is it the person who is using the tool that's to blame? There's a lot of questions around that component. Certainly compliance and legal risks, right? Making sure that you're following all relevant laws and regulations around the use of data and inputting data into different places. And then environmental impacts, right? We talk about the move to the cloud and everything's in the cloud as if this was all just kind of floating in the ether, but this is all based off of physical buildings full of physical racks that have physical computing chips that require a lot of water to keep them cool and require a lot of electricity to keep them running. And so certainly as you're evaluating where to use AI and specifically generative AI, thinking through, is there something else that does this better, right? Is there a way that you could do this with traditional machine learning rather than generative AI, which takes up more environmental resources? Or maybe the answer isn't AI at all, and that's kind of the better thing. And that's something I would highlight in general, is I see a lot of leaders approach this as, oh, look at generative AI. This is a great tool. Now, which of these problems over here should I be applying it to? And I would encourage you to think of it in the other direction of start with the problems that you're seeing within your roles, within your teams, your agencies, and then look and say, okay, is generative AI the right tool for this job, or one of these other, right? Whether it's a different form of AI, whether it's a different technology altogether, because then you become, right, you have the hammer in search of the nail. All right, and then so with this in mind, looking at a few more examples in the government HR space that I would categorize as high risk. So what I'm not saying never ever do this or don't do anything related to this, but you just have to think extra critically about some of these. So for one is unsupervised resume screening or like resume to requirements mapping, right? Again, you could be potentially cutting out many people of the process and denying candidates, denying whatever, based off of a system that may be perpetuating inequities or what have you. So keep that in mind. Any disciplinary actions, again, this goes back to the explainability piece. Performance management, again, are you using it to make a decision of whether someone should be promoted or not promoted? Or are you just using it to like help craft the wording of the review that you're going to give? Now, I know some people have said, well, some people's approach to this has been, the people that work for me deserve to be reviewed by a human, not reviewed by a machine. Others will say, I write the review, I just want it to be worded better or put into a specific format that my organization requires. So I write it, put it into the tool. So again, not saying never use it for anything related to performance management, but again, think critically and thoughtfully about how you're using it and in what parts of that process. Employee survey summarization or classification. Couple things around this one. One being, do your employees want you? Are they giving you permission to take what they've given you and put it into a generative AI tool? Right? Have they given you that permission? Two, have you verified, have you gone through all of those submissions to make sure there isn't confidential information that someone has given as part of that process that should be redacted, removed, what have you? And then the last, of course, how are you going to verify that its classification is accurate? And is actually, whether it's, you want to say, are these sentiments positive or negative? How do people feel about this? What process do you have in place to verify that it's aligned with how you would want that to be done? And then, of course, just blanket anything to do with sensitive employee data. So, right, health records, payroll, benefits, leave records. Think very critically about what is the tool that you're using. Is this a tool where you should be putting that kind of information? By default, I would just avoid it, but certainly talk within your agencies and your teams about what the rules are for the different systems that you're using. All right, takeaways from here: understanding what should and shouldn't be entered into a generative AI tool, and usually that's going to be determined based on the tool that you're using. Knowing just the general limitations of generative AI. So there's some things that it's really good at and really reliable for. There are other things where it's not as reliable. And so using it, figuring that out, especially within your own use cases. Carefully evaluating the output from any generative AI tool before using it. So again, you have the most critical skill you need to successfully use generative AI. And that's that one right there. Like, this is something you've already been doing. You wouldn't be where you are in your careers without, having done that well. So just highlighting that. So, all right. I wanted to get through that quickly, and apologies if it was too quickly, because I wanted to make sure that we had plenty of time to answer questions. So if you have questions about these specific things that we've touched on, if you have questions just more broadly, like, hey, I've been wondering about this, Amanda and I would love to hear them.
Yes. And
Oh,
again, if you're in the
awesome.
room, just hang. I'm so sorry, Amanda. Again, if you're in the room, just wait for Izzy to bring you the mic. And our friends online, please feel free to ask questions so that Kristen can amplify them. Okay. Sorry.
Go ahead, Amanda.
Oh, no. As folks are thinking about questions, I wanted to raise another issue. So, and I can give you an example as an educator. So when I think about an issue, I like to think about it one way and then walk around it and think about it the other way. And something I've not heard mentioned yet in the conference, which may have been that I've simply not heard it, is that when we talk about AI, and I've heard it mentioned yesterday and this morning already, I see us talking mostly about how we might use it. And I also want, if we flip that to the other side, I think it's really important to understand how others might be using it in the HR context and you receiving that. So having an awareness of an applicant potentially using it to craft their materials, an applicant using it to prepare for an interview, or having it open live during an interview. Applicants using it to write writing samples or do things like that. Not to add another, oh my gosh, you need to be worried about these things now. But to say too, an awareness of those is really important, and maybe an internal policy on how you might navigate when you're pretty sure someone maybe submitted a CV or a resume that was written by AI, and where and when does it matter, and where and when might it overrepresent or underrepresent skills, having an awareness of how it might be used. And I think to put those two like views together, in your own testing, or one way to get comfortable with the generative AI tools, if you aren't, is to test it as an applicant. Write a resume for me, right? And see what kind of output it might have. Because the more familiarity you have with output as a text that you can read, the more equipped you will be to recognize when something feels like it came from AI. So I will say, an awareness of how it might be used, and you might be receiving AI generated content, how you might look at that. And I would say again here that as experts who have looked at, I don't know how many resumes in your life, you may also already be noticing this is a little different than before, or these are all coming in feeling very similar. So I will say those are things to keep an eye out for as well, to turn the issue around. And in using it, I think you may actually equip ourselves to better evaluate it on the other side. I do that when I'm teaching. How might I use it in my teaching? How might my students be using it? And I think it's really critical for me to understand, have an awareness, and be testing out both.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Paula.